Uh, Great. Good. Well, welcome everybody to the first proper Facebook Live. I did a little one myself, just saying hi to the group, but this is our first one with guests. And we have the wonderful Kate and Ruth with us. Hi, Kate. Hi, Ruth.
Hi.
Hello.
And I wanted to have a discussion about horses as one of our first Facebook Lives. And by the way, do say hi when you come in. I can see you're in there then, and I can see people coming in now, which is great. Do say hi and let us know where you are around the world. But always good to know where people are tuning in from. And from my point of view, and I have to kind of state this, I don't know much about horses. I don't have a horse. I obviously set up the dog centre care platform to think about a lot of the discussions that were going on around dogs, a lot of the things that we're starting to question about some of the received wisdoms and the mindset shifts that are going on, which is about what happens when we keep moving forwards and growing about our understanding of the wonderful animals that we share our lives with. And I think it's really healthy to have those discussions. And I've noticed that there's very similar discussions happening within the horse world. And there's a lot of parallels here, I think, amongst the two communities really. So if we start off with you then, Kate, obviously you work in with horse behavior, and you head up the International Equine Professionals IEP, which is
Right.
the behaviorists who work with that kind of thing. What is this mindset shift that is happening within the horse community?
I think I think it's quite a complex one because I think there's multiple factors involved from the classic, very traditional, this is how we live and work with horses. They are there for us to use, very classic traditional. I think there was then quite a big mindset shift quite a few years ago into natural horsemanship, where various kind of traveling trainers, let's say, um, uh, garnered quite a following under the guise of let's be natural with horses, and this is actually about horse behavior, and this is a true understanding of horses, but in many ways isn't quite there. Um, and then we have introduced things like positive reinforcement into the horse world. And then there are people who are actually thinking more about the ethological perspective. And everything's kind of coming together, I think, on different levels, and people are mixing together. And the waters are perhaps a little bit cloudy at the moment. I don't know if you'd agree, Ruth. But certainly from a professional point of view, which is why it was actually Brigitte Barton who set up IEP. And we're a group of multi-professional people. So it's not just behavior, not just behaviorists, not just farriers, not just anything. It's any profession in the equine industry. So we're sharing ideas the whole time to try and support people who are out there working with those who share their lives with horses, because it's still very, very tough out there. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we come up against in terms of shifting belief systems, is that you can actually appeal to certain people, and they will go and do research and they'll start to think about things, but then they share their lives and their horses' lives with other people around them who are not ready for that change. And then there's a big dynamic that goes on there. And I think that that's one of the hurdles that we've got.
You know what I'm hearing here is a very close representation of the journey that's going on with dogs, and in
Yeah.
fact same with children actually. So you
Yep.
have
Yes.
this kind of initial focus on who children are, who dogs are, who horses are, what they need, and what you've always done.
Yeah.
Then you have these different strands that start to be pulled away from that, because for the individual horse, the individual child, the individual dog, well, their story is more complicated than that, and actually their needs are more complicated than that. So then you have all these different disciplines that start looking at things. When you start thinking about the natural horsemanship, that makes me think about a lot of the movement we had maybe 10 years ago from people who are like, we've lived with wolves, and if you act like this with the dog,
Yes.
then it's more natural. And then, of course, the move to reinforcement, which is for me about still having a very task transactional thing, but doing it nicer and more humanely and getting more cooperation. And now the thoughts about, and then the ethology coming in, and now the thoughts moving forward, like, right, how do we become more available to that individual animal's care and support needs? What is that story? So Ruth, what are some of the common misrepresentations do you feel around horses about who they are and what they need, and how is that kind of baked into some of the friction, I guess, about moving this narrative on a little bit?
Well, I think traditionally, most horses were used in a work-based context. I'm going back to the 18th, 19th century now. I'm going back a long time, but that was their job, and they had to do a job, and they had to pull a cart, or they were in a carriage or whatever, and they were made to work, and they were viewed and like a car, really. You got in it, and they didn't. There must have been people who actually saw horses as themselves, but on the whole, they were there for a reason. They certainly weren't, unless you were very wealthy, they weren't there as a pet or whatever. They were there to do a job of work. So how they were managed, that has carried on. Even today, we still have what I call 19th century practices about and views, because people, I don't suppose, know no better, but today people are now, some people don't actually see the horse as a horse. They see it as, I'm going to go and ride it, and it has to behave, and if it doesn't, it's really naughty. But I think now people are actually starting to see, a bit like with the dogs, they're actually starting to see the horse as a horse, that it is actually a living, breathing creature that has its own thoughts and ideas. But because we've been stuck in this rut for a long time, where you lead it in a certain way, and all because a lot of us were trained in a particular way of, when we were younger, of going to the riding school, there was only one system of learning how to ride, how you led your horse, and it actually dates back to being a cavalry officer, all these things. So that's why you get on the left side, because so your sword doesn't hit the horse when you put your leg over. Well, we've moved past that. I don't wear a sword when I ride. I'm sure Kate does. So that has been a problem, because we've just carried on the same wheel, not maliciously, but people have, obviously they're feeding them and giving them the food they need, the water they need, the basic needs, but they haven't actually seen the horse as a horse with its own feelings. And therefore, when a horse didn't want to do something, and I had this only yesterday, when I was at an event with some horse people, and this chap was talking about, he's a horse trainer, and this horse had come to him, and it was really difficult because it napped. Now, nap means stopping and not wanting to go on, and that is the horse telling you that actually it can't cope with what you're asking it to do. It might be it can't cope with being on his own, or he might be in pain. But this chap said to me, he's just really naughty, and he just won't do as he's told. And we had a bit of a robust discussion about it. And he's much younger than me. I mean, he's only 30. So it's still trying to get people to see that the horse isn't a human. It doesn't have human thoughts and emotions. It doesn't, and horses, like dogs, live in the now. But they don't sit there spending hours working out how they're going to get back at me, or doing things to make me cross. That isn't in their mindset. They're more interested in what they're going to eat, or whether it's nice weather, or whether their back hurts. But there is more and more people now who are coming to horses, and a lot of them actually haven't come through the traditional routes. They've perhaps come to it later, who are looking at horses in a different way. Maybe they've had dogs, and horses are now being seen as a creature with its own thoughts and feelings, and now people are wanting to know how to sort of relate to that.
That's thank you for sharing that, Ruth, because I think again there's it's important to stress how we perceive things. There's this kind of same perception as everything, how we perceive the lived experience of another, how we perceive the behavior of another, how we perceive anything does go a long way to driving our responses. And when we have such a big cultural, societal bias towards these things, and a lot of the early experiences we have through the ways that we're taught, like you said, Ruth, you know, you get taught a certain way. This will correlate a lot with people who are thinking about dogs. You know, when I was growing up in the 70s and 80s, we had Barbara Woodhouse on the telly with choke chains and checks and corrections and all these kind of things. And definitely what don't want anybody to feel with any of these conversations, or whether it's dogs, horses, or anything, is that it's some form of judgment on anything. It's a recognition that we're all on a journey of learning more, actually, and the science is going with that, actually. And we know with Pet Remedy that a lot of people who find the product for their horses and they introduce the product and then they see a shift, it makes them think, oh, maybe there is an element here about the animal's emotional state that I hadn't considered. And you reference pain, we'll come on to that in a moment. A lot of people who have perceived their animal as being difficult, disruptive, challenging, and then they find out, oh, actually they're in pain. These are real learning curves that we have to go on sometimes. And I think what we want to do, ultimately, most people, I think, with their companion animal, with their horse, is to have a relationship with them. They care for them. They want to make sure that their care needs are being met. But if we're not aware of what those care needs are, then we aren't available to them. So if we think about that, then, Kate, how connected are many of what might be seen as behavioral challenges with horses? How connected are those behavioral challenges in relation to emotional and conditions and states in your experience?
Well, first, I just want to add that I'm not an equine behaviourist, so I'm not the best to talk about it from a behavioural point of view per se, but from a pain and physical point of view, that's where I work. So I would say uber connected. I really, really would. And when you actually break down a lot of the behavioural issues that people come up with their horses, so won't load, rears, bucks, won't leave the stable, bites me, so many things. When you actually drill down and look at every element of the horse from really the emotional perspective, to the social perspective, to the environment perspective, to the body perspective, the whole thing, you normally find that the behavioural output is strongly influenced by one or more of those things. So I think there's 100% correlation there. And as Ruth said, there's no kind of Machiavellian intelligence going on behind the scenes. They're not planning to be a pain. But I mean, horses are really good at hiding pain, and that's an ethological adaptation from showing pain as a weakness and making themselves easy prey. So they're really good at hiding it. But there comes a point, and obviously different thresholds there with different individuals, but there comes a point where they can't perhaps hide it anymore. And then sadly, a proportion of the horse community will see that as a bad behavior, as a difficult behavior, as a stubborn, as a just trying to take the mick, to put it politely, behavior. And it's really a cry for help, and I literally can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. And then, like in the dog world, I won't say quite often, but perhaps it is quite often, they're pushed to such a place that they literally have tried everything to tell us and are not listened to and are in physical or emotional pain. And then it's shut down, it's learned helplessness, it's all of those things. And sadly, it's not a rare thing. But yeah, I would 100% say there's something emotional and physical behind behavioral challenges, and as always, emotion drives behavior.
Yeah, and I think I would invite anybody listening in now, to think about their own behavior. You know, how often do you think about your own behavior? The answer is, well, we don't much. We just behave, and your behavior will change based upon a lot of intrinsic stuff, how you're feeling, whether you're in pain, whether you're tired, whether you're stressed, whether you're angry. You know, these kind of things affect that kind of thing. And part of the problem, I think, societally is the reason I think it's very easy to fall into thinking, well, bad dog, bad horse, bad child, is because that's how we have invariably been conditioned ourselves being brought up. Our own needs often were overlooked because somebody else had decided we were difficult, challenging, whatever. And then you have a choice then, don't you? Especially as a social species like us, I either keep trying to push my needs or I just give in to it and I comply because I want to just kind of be able to feel that I can fit in. And I think there's a big cross section here about how these things connect. And physical stuff. The amazing Sarah Fisher, who's hopefully going to come and have a chat with us in the group. A lot of the work that she's done around observational things with horses and dogs, and how many horses that she's got in. She's shared stories with me where she's got involved where it wasn't about the horse not wanting to; they couldn't. And just by understanding that and giving them some relief, they're different. They can cope better. They can change. These things happen, you know.
Yeah.
And I think it's it must be quite challenging, I think, for caregivers, owners, or whatever, however you want to class yourself as, when you're pushing upstream with an animal where you're constantly trying to make them comply because you feel that's what they've got to do, they've got to behave. And you find that things are getting worse or more difficult, more challenging, and that's when the blame thing comes in. Well, the horse can't be any good then, or you're not any good, you're not doing it right. Whereas in fact, underlying that is something that they're just not aware of regarding that animal's care and support needs, and that's why these conversations are so important. Ruth, anything you want to add that on some of the?
Yeah, absolutely. So what I do is I'm a Tellington Touch practitioner, as people may have seen from my bio. One of the things that we learn from the outset is that all behaviour is a form of communication. And what I try and teach my clients, so, you know, why is your horse doing this? And it's an interesting, there is research now, I can't point you to it, but I did read it a long time ago, that horses that buck, over 95% of them have a back issue or a musculoskeletal issue. And it's important and it's also with the observations as well, to try and show people, which I'm sure Kate does as well, you know, why their horse is behaving like it is, or look at the way it's standing, or look at the way it's head. And there's a lot of research by a lady called Sue Dyson, who used to work at the Animal Health Trust, about pain and the shape of a horse's eye. So when they've got really almond-shaped eyes, which is really interesting, that is usually a sign that they're in an extreme amount of pain. And they hold tension in their faces. And
which makes sense, because that would be the same for us, right?
Yes, absolutely. And even in a dog as well, the same. I mean, we're all anatomically the same. If you lay our skeletons out, we've just got slightly different shaped bones, but actually, we are fairly similar as a species. So yeah, I mean, so that is also showing people that actually, no, your horse is not happy. Just look at him. Just look at how much tension he's got in his head and his neck, and but it's difficult when once people see it. Then, you know, if they're open to suggestions, then actually there's quite a revelation to them, and then they can start on their journey. But you will always, as Kate, there is always a minority that they're not in the right space at this time to hear what you're saying. But you can plant seeds, and most bizarrely, actually, sometimes when you think that it's the person you least think who will listen, who actually is the person who says, oh, you'll never guess what, but I was looking at my horse the other day and I noticed it was doing this, this and this. So it is difficult, but it is also getting people to understand that, you know, you don't just put on an extra tack and you don't yank their heads in. And a lot, because horses are different from dogs in the fact that we actually sit on them, and so it's two skeletons moving at the same time. There's all sorts of that causes all sorts of problems, and how people sit on a horse and whether they're the right weight for the horse, and all sorts of things comes into play, which also becomes quite difficult if you're quite that's a difficult road to go down. But yeah, it's a difficult one, but people are, I think, beginning to understand more. And I'll just say quickly, I had the grey horse on the picture that we had for the thing, who sadly I lost 5 weeks ago. But she came to me and she was very quiet for the first 2 weeks. She was the model horse, but that's because when horses come into a new environment, they shut down and they're in survival mode. They've been moved from where they knew. It's like if I put you in a car and suddenly shipped you 200 miles and dumped you in somebody else's house, you'd hardly be bouncing around thinking this is a wonderful day, would you? You'd be thinking, why the hell am I here? What's she done? I want to get back to Kieran. I can't, you know. After a couple of weeks, she would attack me. She would bite me. She would kick me. She would behave like a dangerous dog. And I obviously knew with what I do that there was something wrong. Luckily, I had some things I could help her with and ways I could connect with her. But to cut a very long story short, she had really bad gastric ulcers, and horses get ulcers when they're stressed, and they can get ulcers within 24 hours, which is where the pet remedy comes in, because that really helps them be calm. And other people hadn't listened to her. They just thought she was difficult. And yet she was screaming, really screaming, I am in so much pain. But nobody had listened to her. And I mean, she did bite me, and it did hurt a lot. But obviously, I did not then go at her. But the classic thing for that is to just really hit her. I mean, really hit her hard for being naughty. But we didn't. We got her treated, and then we changed her diet. And it's the same with horses. So horses have a very delicate digestive system, and that's important to keep regulated as well, because obviously that is going to affect their mental and emotional well-being with the gut biome, just like it does with the humans, just like it does with the dogs. But horses have a very fragile hindgut system, so I think they're even more sensitive to the changes than, say, we are. I mean, if you vary your horse's feed slightly, they can colic within 24 hours. They don't do well to changes. So, and I think people don't understand that as well. It's the whole management of your horse and what it's doing that can affect its emotional well-being, and, getting it to a safe space, if you like.
And this comes to the crux maybe of some of the friction between that more traditional outlook of horses and them as being a tool, if you like, working in sport. I think, and again, another parallel with dogs, of course, because back in the day we saw dogs as being there to do a work, and then to translate that into sport. I think that's the kind of thing. But if I'm right in remembering something I think I learned from Amber Batson, actually, Dr. Amber Batson, who's a veterinary behaviourist, about the high incidence of stomach ulcers in racehorses, for example, and all these kind of things. When we think about, even I remember hearing from somebody, I can't remember who, about how horses develop musculoskeletal, and actually they're not developed enough before they're even starting to be run or used for sports. So actually there's the friction then, isn't it? Because now we know more about the physical components. There is some kind of contrasting elements to what we're already doing with them in these elements. So that's quite challenging then, isn't it, when you start looking at people thinking about the whole horse. Any thoughts on that, Kate?
Yeah, quite a lot of thoughts on that. And I think that this is partly going back to what Ruth was saying about Sue Dyson, and that work has been publicised beautifully. And if anybody's interested that hasn't already seen it, it's a website called 24behaviours.org, the figure 2, the figure 4. I think behaviours is with an OR. But the thing that I think is partly why we're struggling even more in the horse world is because we do have different motivations for them, and sport is a big one, and so therefore money. And the knowledge that a horse's musculoskeletal system takes up to 8 years in a tall male horse, it can be 8 years to fully develop. That information's been out there very publicly for a long time. So then I think we have to consider a bit of cognitive dissonance or bias or both, because at the end of the day we could wait, but the money's there and the time's ticking, and we can get what we need out of this horse while it's still 2 years old, and then sell it on, or worse, whatever. Take what you need from it, churn and burn them. and sadly that still is a mentality. But what I would add is that all of these things are not exclusive to the racing world. And I think the race world gets a lot of publicity in terms of ulcers and development and all of those things, but other sports, horses are worked too much too soon, for the purpose of getting them out there into a money-making scenario. And ulcers are prevalent. I mean, stress, and also physical stress and the connection with ulcers, as well as emotional stress and the connection with ulcers, because they can come from both. So I can't actually quite remember what your original question to me there was, Annie, because I've just rambled.
Beautifully, and I think the similarities there as well, because there's high propensity for ulcers in sled dogs.
Right.
The same kind of reason, just because of what that does. But I think what I also know, because I speak to people, is and this is what's so wonderful about this group, because we're trying to find a platform to have conversations around asking some of these questions and doing it in a safe way so that people can think about the threads that are important. And in the same way within dog sports, there are more and more people now putting emotional, physical well-being at the heart of things, and then conditioning on from there. And I know there are more people doing the same for horses. So it's not a case of not doing something. There can be that middle ground, and people are exploring that more. And that's because of the conversations that are being started by people like yourselves and others. And I think it's really valuable to think about these things. But this is not in the realms of kind of wishy-washy on the edge of stuff anymore. This is central to our understanding from behavioral science, and also developmental science. It's factual. So we can ignore it if we want to, like you say, Kate, we can. Or we can think, okay, so what does this mean then? And how do we try and bridge that gap a little bit? It's not about making big shifts, because that never happens that way. It's about the movement forwards. And I referenced children earlier. We had a wonderful person called Rachel Michaud in my dog centre care group, looking at how we support children differently now. It was only like 80 years ago we'd stick them up a chimney to clean the chimney. So we've come a long way there, understanding children's needs and wants. And I think we're doing the same with animals. I think it's happening in the dog world, perhaps a bit more ahead of horses, but the same conversations will have to come, won't they, Ruth?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and also, I mean, you quoted about the racehorses, but the reason that the research is available is because the racehorse community have paid for it. So that's why racehorses are always featured, and dressage horses are not so much. I mean, the only thing I would say about racehorses is they do get constant veterinary care all the time, and there are other sectors where they don't. So they are actually the ones that are the most highly monitored. I know they're the most highly visible, but they are actually the most highly monitored of all the different disciplines. And there are some disciplines out there where there are no monitoring at all, where terrible things happen. I think as people begin to understand, it's also really, I mean, Kate rides, and I like riding, but obviously I respect my horse. But a horse is a big animal to look after. It's very expensive. I mean, I'm very lucky I have my own land, but it's not cheap to keep a horse. And so I think part of the pressure on people is that they want to ride their horse. They don't want to wait years. And of course, then it also goes back to this misunderstanding of it being a big being. So when it's a younger being, it's 2 or 3, it's not as well developed, it's smaller, and you can do more with it, or you can force it to do more easily because it hasn't developed. A bit like, your 4-year-old child, I can pick up and put in the car, can't I? Somebody's 14-year-old son, I'm not going to be able to pick up and put in the car, and I'm probably going to have a black eye for my efforts. And it's a bit the same with the horse. And one of the accepted things in the horse world has been that you put their saddles and bridles on when they're young. Although the very old traditional thing was you taught them to wear a saddle and bridle and walked around with them for a few weeks, and then you put them in a field and left them for a year and let them grow. But the pressure on, keeping your horse, you're paying, particularly if you live in the southeast, you're paying huge amounts in livery fees and everything else. And people don't want to wait 3 or 4 years before they can ride their horse, because from their perspective, what have they got for it? So I mean, I'm not suggesting you should ride young horses, by the way. It sounds as if I am, but but I mean, I can see where people are coming from in that respect. You know, and they've paid a lot of money for their horses as well. Horses aren't cheap these days, thank goodness. There was a period when horses were the same price as a jacket. You could buy a foal for 50 quid, and people were keeping them in their back gardens, and they were very undervalued, and the pandemic has pushed the prices up. But I think that's a good thing, because horses are now respected more, because if people have to pay more, then, you know, if you've made that investment, then you're going to look after it more. If you paid 50 quid at the sales for it, and you put it in your back garden, and you have no idea that you shouldn't just be giving it bread and, you know, a cup of tea, which did happen. So but I think people are, it's getting people to see their horses, getting them to understand what their needs are, and also that every horse is an individual, and it has individual needs. So not all horses can wear horseshoes, but some have to, because they have very thin soles. They're going to get very sore feet if they don't. Some of them have to wear them for medical reasons. Not all horses can be turned out 24/7. You know, there is this thing, oh, well, we've got to turn, your horses should be turned out 24/7. Well, in an ideal world, if they could roam where they liked, you know, across Exmoor or whatever, you can, then yes, but is the horse suited to that? Are they on a livery yard, kept in an area where there's no shade or anything? It's quite complicated. That, you know, it's getting people to understand that it's a bit like us. Everybody's different. We all would like different foods. We'd all like to drink different things. And it's not one size fits all. And I think for a long time in the horse world, there's been this idea that actually you just do A, B, C, and D, and that's it. And that's fine. So it's really getting people to see their horses as and I think more people are now.
Yeah.
Seeing the horse as an individual, and that individual has needs. Even it might even be that it is a sort of, so we've got the horses that are what we call our native breeds, that are designed to be outside all the time. They come with their woolly leg warmers, and they have nice thick double coats, and they can stand out in the cold. I've got ex-race horses that are really thin, and they have really thin coats, and they have no fur on them, and they wouldn't stand out in the cold for 5 minutes without shivering. But even when you've got a horse that you think, oh, well, it could do that, it might have a condition or something, or that it can't cope. So I think it's recognizing that every being is an individual, and then getting people to understand that you have to tailor it to that animal.
Yes. And again, I think the thing is with that kind of, you know, we think we know who a horse is, we think we know who the dog is, we think we know who the child is, and the ABCD thing, and the one size fits all. For many horses, many dogs, many kids, they muddle through that, you know, and that's the thing. And when we start thinking about these discussions, it really brings into focus two very specific groups for me. One is that young animal, and what it is we can do differently now we know better about their lived experience to help them to be that more physically and emotionally well-regulated, well-rounded animal who, guess what, could do more for us then. Actually, we know that. It's the same with dogs, you know, the same with children. If those needs are met, they're likely to learn better. They're likely to thrive better. We just know it. And also the second group where this really brings into our focus are those children, dogs, horses with behavioral challenges. And especially when we think about dogs, those dogs who are potentially dangerous, actually, the type that we all work with, because they are not feeling heard, they don't feel safe. And in my experience of working with that class of dog for a long time, I've not met a dog yet that wasn't in pain. Physical pain, often there is often an element there, whether that is primary or secondary, but there's an element. But emotional pain and social pain, because they're just as important and just as powerful on the system, you know. I think that's really important.
Can I just say something on that as well, Andy? That the difference between the horse world and the dog world is that a horse could have 25 to 30 homes through its lifetime.
Wow.
So
Yeah,
whereas
you
and that obviously is, I reckon that if a horse moves to a new environment, it takes about a year for it to settle down. Now, in these horses where they've got pain or problems like the one I was talking about, if she hadn't come to me, she could have gone to the horse sales. She would have gone to an owner. She wasn't right. 3 weeks later, she could have been at the horse sales again. She could have gone to another owner. She wasn't right. And that can go on and on and on. I mean, some horse owners have their horses, but would never be with a horse at the end because it goes before you get to that stage. So, I mean, I think that's the slightly, and that is quite a big problem, that if you're trying to emotionally support a horse, because horses are herd animals, and I was having this discussion with a friend of mine the other day. I mean, it's the same with dogs. We decide everything for them. So my two horses who live here did not choose to live together. I put them together. Okay, I introduced them slowly and everything, but they get on well together, but I caused that. They didn't choose to be friends with one another. They don't choose the field they go in. They don't choose the stable I put them in. They don't choose what they eat. That's all down to me. I mean, I've tried to have a natural lay here so they can choose things from the hedgerow, but you know what I mean. And I think that's very difficult for these horses, particularly these horses that, when I go and see some of my clients, and you'll find out that the horse has been, it might be 9, and it might have had 9 homes. Wow. And that is an awful lot for anybody. I mean, bad enough if I had to move 9 times, once every year. I would find that incredibly stressful, and I'd know what I was doing because I'd have chosen to do it. But these horses don't choose, and 1 minute they're in one place, then they're in another place, and everywhere they go, the management regime is different. Yeah. And they may have friends, they may not have friends. And horses, you can't just put them out in a field with another horse, which is a misnomer, because it takes time for them to get to know one another. And because horses can kick each other and break their legs, and that can be life ending, that is a problem. So these poor horses are completely emotionally wrecked, really, by that stage, because they don't know whether they're coming or going.
And it's a classic sign, again, it's a quite universal sign, I think, of an animal or the child, again, making those references, whose care and support needs aren't met, being passed along, and the expectation is on the horse, the dog, the child to adapt to stuff. There's somebody called Jerry Lee Kroll in America, who's a clinical social worker, who's really pushing this notion that with children, we have to move away from the child, the emphasis being on the child to be adoptable. In other words, if you don't behave a certain way, nobody will love you. 2, bearing witness to that child's care and support needs, and empowering the new caregivers to respect those care and support needs. And that's what we're seeing a lot more within the rescue and shelter sector with dogs now, more, because again, it was the case, and it still is, sadly, where it's up to the dog to somehow behave for people to do it. So it's very similar, I think. But I think because of the nature of the horse's life and that time, how long they live, everything is kind of factored up by whatever. This has been an amazing conversation, I think, to look at some of these threads, because these are realities. They're not just, as I say, they're not just things that are being plucked out there. These are just some realities we have to consider. And we have to ask these questions, and we might not even have the answers to them, and that's okay too. But we have to start thinking about how, as a horse community, I guess, we think about those shifts that need to be looked at, some of those steps. Because you must find, Kate, especially, as I say, you focus a lot on the physical side of things, but physical and emotional completely connected, of course. And emotional well-being is, because anybody who's had any form of pain or chronic physical condition knows that it affects emotional well-being too. We have this notion that emotional well-being matters, because it does. And I think you must see yourself, when you have been able to support a horse and the horse's primary caregiver to unpick some of these bits, that's when you see the change in the behavior. I think this is why we've got to think, we've quite often looked at it from the wrong end of the stick, really.
Yeah.
Because if the horse feels differently, if the horse feels safer, less in pain, more comfortable, feels more agency over movement, because movement must be a big thing for horses, I would guess, about how they feel they need to navigate an environment, even pain or not. That's when you see the real behavior change.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think one of the just on the back of what Ruth was saying about new homes, and trauma is a big thing, as it is in humans and in dogs and in other animals. And sometimes just because the home that person is providing for their horse might, from the outside, look, this should be perfect. I've considered every aspect and this should be paradise for this horse. Sometimes coming from a history where they're used to aversive practices and constant stabling and bad diet and pain and stuff, moving to such a contrasted environment and management system, although it should be good for them, I think what we need to remember is it takes a long time for that adaptation, for them to actually realize this is a good thing, because it's so different and it's so not what they're used to. But that's quite a shock for some people, because they are on board with all of this thinking, and they're researching and they're thinking about, well, how do horses live and what do they need, and I want to make sure this and that, and they're doing the best they can, and then they get the horse and it's kind of like, okay, you don't seem happy. And I think that's quite a thing to come to terms with, and quite hard. But I am forever encouraged by the number of people, actually hugely pleasantly surprised, the number of people that I work with that are really wanting to understand their individual horses, and many of them have got more than one horse, and go to the ends of the earth, to their own kind of physical and financial detriment, to make sure that, you know, they are considering those things. And it's hugely heartening in the equine world to actually see that, because we do see a lot of the other side, but it is very heartening to see. But yeah, to go back to your question, emotional pain, negativity, trauma, whatever, very much presents in what we see physically. And one horse springs to mind. She's been in her current home about 8 years, which is a good home. She is very well catered for, and her needs are always, you know, from emotional, physical point of view, all points of view. But her past life held a lot of trauma, and she clearly still holds some of that trauma now. And she is letting go. She is letting go with a lot of care. But, you know, it's taking a lot of time and understanding, but that's what she needs. But I think, as well, as a prey animal, you see just generally horses, when they see or sense something in the environment, the immediate reaction is a hypervigilance, a head up hypervigilance, and that's kind of an immediate SNS response, and a physical protective response, and to actually educate a horse that, you know what, you're safe, you can trust me, you can let that guard down, you can relax those muscles, you can engage a more parasympathetic state. Takes a lot of time, and it's something that they're often very reluctant to let go of, because it's an adaptive response.
As it is for us, I think any sort of trauma-informed approach, it has to be led by the individual, because Rachel, who does a lot of trauma work, says you can't teach safety because you can't, because the other has to feel it, and the nervous system has to believe it. We talk a lot about learned behaviors, and we think about a lot of behaviors somehow being all cognitively driven, but we forget that the nervous system's learning stuff too. And actually, that's the thing we have to focus in on, especially when we start thinking about foundated safety and supporting that. And it starts from feeling heard. And I think this is the thing you were touching on, Ruth, about, again, a common theme here is giving ourselves time to park our own expectations, our own beliefs, our own biases. And that can be hard, I know, but we have to allow ourselves to be as present as we can be through those observations, and think about what we're seeing and try and join some of those dots, because quite often, whether it's a horse, a human, or a dog, even a little thing can make a big difference, because when we think about the principle of relief, which is something I talk about a lot, because I think it's really important, because when we feel something, especially negative, physical pain, emotional pain, social pain, part of the reason for having that feeling is a call to arms to seek relief. And if we find even a little bit of contemporary relief, it can make a huge difference. Even just thinking, oh God, you get me, you hear that, you get now that actually it's the fact that I can't turn left into that box that's the problem, because it hurts a bit, it's a bit too tight, but actually I could go in right for you. Now you've worked that out. Great, thank you. You know, whatever. I don't know whether that's a horse thing.
Yeah, yeah, that was good.
Yeah, good. Oh, good. I've contributed something a bit horsey tonight. Excellent. Well, that's really good. So I think it's really fascinating for me listening to you both share so much tonight. I think giving us I think to understand the complexities of this. Actually, there are many. I think it's very easy to think, you know, I say I don't have horses, I don't know much about horses, to look in from the outside and think, well, that needs changing or that needs doing. But there's a lot of dynamics at play here. And I think we also have to recognize that, just like with other areas of our society, it's not that people are deliberately horrible or cruel. It's a lack of awareness. It's a lack of awareness. And it's how we best support that awareness in a way that both of you have both referenced. People can acknowledge without feeling blocked away from it, because I think that's always a bit of a challenge. And trying to access more about the individual lived experience of the horse, which is what this is all about, really. So as we come to the end of this chat, I think this has been an amazing way to introduce some of these things. What we're going to be doing in the group in the coming months and years, hopefully, is to dive into some of these individual threads. You know, I've got people lined up who can talk about things not just with horses but other animals. It was interesting, you know, we had I shared something about snails in the group, and I had somebody message me saying, yeah, I get that, but you know, what's that got to do with companion animals? You know, who keeps snails? And it is emotional well-being in animals, and snails are an animal. And I think when we start looking at things, if we can acknowledge that the snail might have an emotional lived experience, that they have their own existence, I think it's a good mirror onto us thinking, well, maybe I need to think about my horse differently, or my dog. But even more important, maybe we need to think about our own, because we've all been conditioned into thinking about belief systems about self and all the kind of pressures we have around the expectations and judgments of others about how we should behave. I think it's an interesting thing. So as we come to the end of this first opening conversation about trying to explore emotional well-being in animals, which you've both done amazingly. Ruth first, what have your kind of let's try and leave it on a good optimistic thing. What are the things that you are seeing that you have a lot of positive vibes about? Where do you think things are? Which bits are the bits that you're really interested in and you see the progress being made? And however you want to frame it, really, that question goes out to both of you, but Ruth first.
Well, I think, first of all, just having this conversation, which we would not have had 15 years ago. This, you know, there might be just Kate and me having a chat in a coffee bar somewhere. But the fact that people are changing their mindset is a really, really massive positive thing, I think. And that we are having this conversation, and that people are doing more research. I referred to the Sue Dyson research earlier, but again, that's new. Might seem strange, but it is new. So I think that's really positive. And the people I work with are really interested in, I mean, probably like Kate, if people are really adverse to what you do, then they don't connect with you, so you don't see them. But people are wanting to know more about their horse and what they do. And when I work with them, we have found that if the horse is balanced in their body, it helps their emotional and physical balance as well, and well-being, which is really exciting. And people are having a more open-minded approach to the whole concept of the horse, how it's ridden, what we use on it. And I think more and more, from my perspective, the people I'm talking to are beginning to understand that everybody is an individual, and it isn't one size fits all, and therefore they're looking for, well, how can I help my horse or pony or donkey and what is out there and how can we change. And I think that is, you know, really, really, and there are a lot more people coming into this conversation now, whether they've got a horse or they're interested in a horse or they walk their dog and go past the field with a horse in it, which is really, really good as well. They, you know, and enriches the whole debate, I think.
Brilliant. Yeah, I think that is really positive, and that's why we have to create more and more safe spaces to have these discussions without judgment, without anything other than just thinking, what does this mean for us? I think that's what you've both done really well tonight, actually, is to look at some of these strands, and I've certainly had a lot of things for me to think about. Kate.
Yeah, I think one of the things that's so very important in this particular discussion, as with others, obviously, in terms of facilitating change ongoing is community. So this, as we said, is a really good start, a really good thing. Community on a local basis as well, because I just do see quite often, and I know Ruth does because we've had this conversation, that there's a mix of attitudes within a property, basically in a livery environment, typically, where you've got people who really do want to do this for their horses, but don't, you know, they'll be going down to the yard at a time when they think nobody else will be there, because that's the time when they're going to feel comfortable doing this or behaving in the way they want to behave with their horse. So just on a local basis, I'm very lucky where I am. I've kind of somehow amazingly gathered a group of clients who have become friends and colleagues, other professionals who are very much on this wavelength. And it's pleasing because clients who I've been to see who clearly want to connect feel lonely. They actually feel lonely. And that happens even with people who aren't on a livery yard. Sometimes they have horses at home, but there's no one else locally that they feel they don't want to go to any clinics or any shows or anything like that because they're on their own. And just helping these people to connect, as we do with the professionals in IEP, is it's a good step in the right direction, because I think the numbers are growing, and there's quite a bit more clout with numbers, I guess. It's, you know, as the thinking develops and becomes more widely accepted and intriguing for people, I think it's a good move. There's a lot of positives out there, and although there's still a lot to work on, there are a lot of positives, and yeah, we're going in the right direction.
And it's really valuable to have such wonderful voices like the two of you and other colleagues that I'll be bringing in, because, you know, to have people who can talk with such passion and knowledge and experience, but also in such an open way, and as an invitation to others to think and consider, is how change happens. I think that's important. And this group definitely is going to be a safe space to discuss some of these things. And definitely, if you're listening now, it's definitely a safe space to question things. That's really important. You know, we can question things in that kind of in the spirit of which this group's looking at, and the more awareness we have over time, it invites those little shifts, you know, because and they build up over time. I'm sure the Kate and Ruths in 20 years' time on whatever platform, looking back now, we'll be talking about things in a very different way again, and hopefully things will have moved forwards again more. And we definitely, when you think about the dogs, even 15 years ago, hardly any dog had a harness on. Now most dogs you see out do have a harness on. People have recognized physical well-being more, and people are excited to think about emotional well-being more. That'll be the next step, you know. Well, wonderful. It's been an amazing conversation. I really appreciate you both coming in. Coming in as the first chat is always a big thing, of course, and but you've done the horses and their own emotional well-being proud tonight. Kate,
thank you for having us.
Where can people find a bit more Kate if they wanted to?
A bit more Kate. Okay. Two main places, I guess. I'm based in Norfolk, and my website is equinemassagenorfolk.co.uk. I'm on Facebook, Kate Thornton Equine Sportsman, maybe you see it. And also IEP, so International Equine Professionals, IEPglobal.net. Again, we are on Facebook. Which is not just professionals, for students, it's for people who have horses as companions, anybody who's kind of interested in bettering the world for horses, really. It's a big open community, but yes, that's my main two hangouts.
And we're going to learn more about. We're going to hear more from that organisation as well, and especially from Pet Remedies' point of view. We're looking forward to looking at what we can do to collaborate in the future. I think that's really exciting. So thanks.
Likewise.
Yeah, and Ruth, I know you mentioned about the T-Touch side of things as well, which is obviously important. So how can we find out a bit more, Ruth, and what you do? And
so I am, as I said, a T-Touch practitioner. I am on the tellingtontouchtraining.co.uk UK website, where we all have our own profiles, and my professional page we've had a bit of a problem with recently on Facebook, so you can find me on Facebook as Ruth Evans. That's probably the easiest way to find me. I'm based in West Wales, but do travel far and wide, bringing this amazing work to horses, which I just love, and I love the change that you see in them.
And of course, Tellington Touch is well known in the dog world, but it started off with horses, didn't it?
It did. It started off in the 80s with Linda Tellington-Jones, who developed it with a horse, yes, in a barn in America. And it was done with horses for about 10 years before it was brought to the dogs, although we've gone a bit quiet in the UK on the horse side, but we're hoping to start that up again. But there are quite a few of us out there, and it is an amazing, respectful way to work with your horse at the horse's pace.
Well, we'll definitely have a look at bringing that into this group for live, and that'd be amazing. Well, the next Facebook Live we have is going to be on, I've got to make sure I just double check this. Yes, it is. The 12th of July with Robert Faulkner-Taylor, Dr. Robert Faulkner-Taylor, who's gifted us so much for a long time, decades actually, of work on the science side of things around emotionality. And this is going to be a good one actually for us, because Robert's going to come in and talk about emotional well-being matters for animals, period. So it's not going to be a species specific talk. He's going to show how we can join the dots across the spectrum. And I think that's going to be a really powerful conversation actually, because whether it's the horse, the cat, the dog, or whatever, and a lot of the stuff that we've learned from ourselves, and Rob will be referencing this, about our own emotional lived experience, have been done on studies on mice, monkeys and dogs actually. So you know, I think the human ego back in the day was like, isn't it wonderful what we've learned from these animals because we're special? Now we're thinking behavioral science has gone full circle. Hang on, we kind of learned that from the dogs. We learned that from the mice, especially a lot of the mice stuff. So that'll be really fascinating. So Dr. Robert Faulkner-Taylor coming in the group on the 12th of July, did I say? My brain's gone. This is because I'm going on holiday next week. So I'm going on holiday everybody next week, which will be great. My brain's already there. Thank you again, both of you. Thank you for everybody tuning in tonight. And this conversation will go up onto the YouTube channel, the Pet Remedy YouTube channel, and also stay in the group as well. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Ruth. Amazing conversation. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Andy.
Bye.
Bye.